Hi again, friends. It's Paisleyandglue here, and welcome back to my channel. It's been a weird summer. I've been doing a lot of things for other people, and seeing other people work on their own projects made me want to make my own clothes, which is not something that I normally do, but I thought it could be fun, and I thought it could be extra fun if everyone did it with me. So I'm going to try to do a make-along sort of series. And I am going to be making this Vogue pattern, which is V9259. And I'm going to be doing this cute little romper set here. So if anyone wants to do this along with me, I'm planning on doing a video log of my process. There's probably going to be a couple things that I change in the pattern as doing a mock-up. So if people are interested in seeing how sort of alter patterns as I go, that could be kind of a fun thing. So come along with me if you want. Okay, let's talk a little bit about commercial patterns. So when you go to buy a pattern at the store for the first time, it might seem a little bit daunting. There's a lot of information going on here. We're going to break it down and make it a little easier when you're in the fabric store to buy what you need and avoid multiple trips, because nobody likes that. So this is the Vogue 9259 pattern. And we're going to be making this A design. So this is a very easy pattern. There's not a lot of pattern pieces involved, which is nice. These are all just variations. And by variations, it's just a length variation. So the nice thing is that I'm going to need the least amount of fabric for this, but you could do any of them and it really is not going to change the way we're going to make any of this. So you can go ahead and follow along regardless. Let's look at the back. So the first thing you need to look at is the size chart, and that's usually going to be on this little flap here. And when you go to order patterns, normally there is at least two sort of ranges of sizes that you're going to buy. So this is the 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 version. And then there is also going to be a 16, 18, 20, 22 version. So I am between a 12 and a 14. Normally commercial patterns run very differently than what you normally will buy yourself in the store. So always look at these measurements, and I'm sort of in between these two sizes. So you may be a different size than you expect to be based on what you normally buy yourself. So that is where I'm going to then transfer the 12 to 14 down to this section down here. So we know we're making the A style, showing us that there. So whether my fabric that I'm looking at is 45 or 60 inches, I can go across the chart to the 12 and 14 sizes, and that's going to tell me how much fabric I need to purchase. So this is telling me normally for fashion fabric, it's generally going to be 45 inches if you're purchasing it at a Joann Fabrics. So that's between 2 and 2 1/8 yard. I usually like to buy a little extra for both for shrinking in the wash and also just to have a little extra in case something goes wrong, or I want a pattern match, especially with a striped fabric like this, or if I want to add a lining that they don't ask for, then I have a little extra to work with. When it's telling you here also is what fabrics are suitable to be used for this pattern. This is suggesting a crepeback satin or a lightweight broadcloth. This is kind of like a lightweight linen chambray kind of situation. So that sort of falls to me under the lightweight broadcloth descriptor, so that'll be fine. Really anything sort of lightweight and drapey will work great for this particular pattern. It's also telling you, and this is pretty standard, if you have a very diagonal pattern, it's probably not great for that, so it's unsuitable for obvious diagonals. The other thing it is telling you is what sort of notions and linings you need. So it's telling you fusible interfacing, styles A, B, and C all need for the 12 to 14 size between 1 and 1/8 fusible interfacing. So you can go ahead and get that while you're at the store if you don't have any for yourself. And also you're going to need a lining for both A, B, and C at 45 inches wide. You're going to need half a yard of lining. Notions are anything that's not fabric. So that is going to include your zipper, which is what it says here, 1 7-inch zipper, 2 hooks and eyes, can include snaps, can include Velcro, buckles, anything like that. The thing it usually doesn't suggest, because it sort of goes unneeded to be said, is a matching thread color. So if you don't have a good thread color, which I wasn't sure that I did, go ahead and pick up, for a project like this, probably 1 spool is totally fine. If it's a little bit more involved, you might want to get more than 1 spool. You'll always use it later, but something that is going to match the fabric nicely. And then we're also looking at the finished garment measurement. So sometimes this is telling me how wide each leg is. So if you were like, I know I want it to be super duper wide, this isn't quite as wide as I want it to be. Or if this is too insanely wide and you need to look for a different pattern, just kind of giving you sort of a finished measurement, because sometimes these very beautiful renderings on the front are sort of a stylized version of what the garment actually is, and doesn't always give you a great picture about what it actually will look like on a real body and not an illustration. Okay, so that is kind of information that you need for the back that will get you out of the fabric store with what you need. The next thing that you're going to do when you come home is you're going to wash this fabric. And some fabric is not washable. That is valid. I tend to wash things that maybe aren't washable to most people, but I will still wash them, usually on a hand wash, or I'll do like a cold wash just to get any sort of sizing out of it, or like just yucky material. Hand wash this baby. You don't want it shrinking on you later. Nobody likes that. So now we are going to go into the pattern and check out what we got. It's only 1 page. So easy. It's going to be such a fun project. Okay, this is our introductory page here. And this is telling us a couple things that we need to know about the pattern. So again, we're doing A style, and these are the various pattern pieces that we're going to find in our envelope. This is a very simple pattern. There's only 6 pattern pieces, and you're going to need all of them for either variation that you're doing. It's just whether or not you're cutting this pant section short, medium, or long. So we're going to cut out everything, super easy. And there's another size chart down here if you need it. And then this business, which looks kind of intimidating and scary, is basically just telling you the way you can lay it out on your fabric, what various notches and symbols on your pattern are going to tell you. This is handy, the right side of the fabric, wrong side of the fabric, and that's going to carry on into our instructions. So you can always tell when you're looking at the instructions what is right and what is wrong. It tells you a little bit about grain lines and what the various notches mean. It tells you a little bit about what these various cutting techniques are that you might be using. And it also, very important, tells you what your seam allowance is. And it's always going to be 5/8 unless otherwise indicated on the pattern piece. And that's very standard for commercial patterns. Normally everything is 5/8 of an inch. It tends to be wide enough that it's not going to fray out and make a hole in your garment, but it's not so wide that it's going to become bulky in seams and become sort of unsightly in those seams. So if we look at the rest of this, these are actual pattern pieces all in tissue paper. And we can go ahead and get these cut out. Okay, we're back. And now we are going to talk about actually what we do with all these tiny little tissue paper pieces. So we've taken our pattern out of the envelope. And now we can kind of see what we've got here. So there's not too many pattern pieces to this one, like I said. So there's 1 through 6. And once you open it up, you can kind of see what we've got. So we've got pocket piece, number 6. So it says pocket, fabric, cut 2, lining, cut 2, pocket ABC. The upper front is number 1, and that's the same for A, B, and C. And it tells you here how many that you need to cut. So cut 2, and then piece 2. This is the upper back piece, so that's sort of like in the back where the zipper goes of the bodice. That is also cut 2. And we can also see some more information on here. So we've got different sizes here. The 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 are these different dashed lines. So at some points on the pattern, it's the same line. And here where we're scooping across the side, front, and down the side seam, there's different sizes for the different lines for the different sizes. So just make sure that when you are looking at how this works, you're cutting on the right size. Now, you don't have to use the tissue paper for your pattern. You can transfer it to another piece of paper. I like doing that because I'll often make alterations to a mock-up before I cut into my fashion fabric, which is what we're going to do on this project. So if you'd like to transfer this paper onto butcher paper or poster board or a different piece of tissue paper so you're not cutting into your commercial pattern, you can go ahead and do that. Or you can just use this. So if you want to just do that, you're going to just cut on the dotted line that corresponds to the size on your envelope that your measurements correspond to, and then you're ready to go into your mock-up fabric. I am going to transfer this to paper, so we're going to do that now. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the different notches and symbols and what some of those mean. So before you go to transfer all of these patterns, I thought we would take a little bit closer look at this so you can kind of see where you're going to be tracing it so you're not super confused. So this pattern, so we're looking at the pattern number 1, pattern piece number 1, includes sizes 6 through 14 all in the same pattern. So some of the lines here, these solid lines, all those sizes use this same line here. But when we get to, this is our side seam, when we get to our side seams, that is where the size differential starts to become apparent. So we can see here, we're at the same line and then we split off depending on what size you are. And you're gonna just check out which number corresponds to the size that your measurements align to from that pattern envelope we looked at earlier. So mine is a 12. So here 14 is the largest in this particular pattern set. So 12 is just 1 in from that. And you can see all these dotted lines are slightly different. So whenever we are looking at the different lines, if I look at this second to longest dashed line, that's going to be my 12. So I'm going to follow this line all the way down, and that kind of jogs over. This is our side seam, and then I'm going to follow my 12 line this way. And then make sure you're getting this little tiny bump out right there. And then they meet together and then they follow the same line for a while. Additionally, it's a little confusing when you get to this point because it seems like maybe this is the 12 line, but this series of numbers is actually corresponding to these little dots. And these are going to help us later when we're putting in some ease stitches, and we'll go over that later. But for right now, you just want to make sure that you get these little circles notated in your pattern. And remember that this is actually your cut line for your pattern. So I've got, this is my 12 line, but I also want to make sure that I'm notating this little circle that has the 12 next to it. And again here, we're going to mark this 12. And then on this section, these are notches. So this is where your side front and your side back are going to connect together. And this is going to tell you, you're going to match the notches on the front to the notches on the back. So you want to make sure that you make a little notch here, little notch there. Again, we're on the 12 line here. If you were on the 14 size, you'd be marking these notches and so forth. Also mark that notch. And then these circles, wherever you find them, you also want to mark those. are going to help us match up our pieces later. Another important thing to notate is where the grain lines are. On each pattern piece, you're going to have a straight line that shows you where the grain line of the fabric should fall when we go to cut these out of the fabric. So don't worry about that at the exact moment, but you do want to make sure that this line is notated on your pattern piece if you're tracing it onto a different piece. And again, and this is the back piece, the side back piece. Again, here's our grain line. I'm going to make sure I mark these two little circles here, these notches, and then I'm going to find my 12, which is the second line. And I'm also going to mark this little circle right here that has the 12 next to it. Now looking at the pants, the shorts front and back, or pants if you're making the longer one, this is the front section. So it tells you here we're going to be cutting 2 out of these. This is piece 4. Again, we've got our grain line that we want to mark here. And then we're also going to look at the different lengths. So these are all the lengths are notated on the same pattern piece. This is for the A view. So this is the one that I'm doing. So this is where I will cut my pattern. So this pattern piece will be much smaller than it could be. And then this is for look B, which is sort of a midi length. And then the longest one is for look C, which is floor length. There is a lengthen or shorten line. Actually, there's 2. Don't worry about that right now. We would go into that if we have some issues with our fit later. You do want to, again, notate, I'm cutting on the 12, so I'm marking this notch, also marking this dot here, and I'm making sure that I mark all of these lines here for our pleats later on. That'll make that much easier. And then notches, more notches, and grain line, we already covered that. This is a little bit hard. The 3 is the waistband pattern. So there's quite a few. You want to mark your center line. You want to mark all these notches and dots. Mark these squares here corresponding to our size. The little tricky part is here where we get to the center back. So if you were cutting the 14, obviously this would be your outside line. We already know that. But then if you see this as a 14 center back, so that's actually, you've got 5/8 seam allowance on here. That's actually where your center back zipper is going to end up being. But it's a little bit confusing because then where's the 12? Well, the 12, again, we're finding that same dotted line that we've been following for the rest of the patterns. And then my 12 center back is this line, which is very close to the 10 cut line. So you just need to make sure that you're following the right lines and notating the right dashes and circles. Okay. So in a super fun turn of events, I recorded myself making my whole paper pattern situation. So I thought, only to find that my camera had run out of memory, so it did not record. So I apologize for that. Sorry, it was going to be a real fun time lapse and everything. So regardless, we talked a little bit about how to trace the pattern pieces. Hopefully that all made sense. So you can see all my paper pattern pieces laid out, ready to go, especially the difference between the front and back pant sections, because now they're short as opposed to being several sizes in one pattern. So that helps make that a little bit more manageable of a size. And now we are ready to go ahead and make our mock-up. Okay, so here we are cutting our mock-up. So you can use a variety of things for your mock-ups. You can use old bed sheets, are a perfect thing. If you go to the thrift store, buy some old bed sheets for a couple bucks, that's much cheaper than buying yardage of fabric that you're only going to use once. Something that's a general same weight and drape as your final fabric is a good idea, but not necessarily required. Usually something that's lighter weight than what you will end up being fine. Mostly we just want to do something in an inexpensive fabric, do a quick check to make sure that the fit is right, and make alterations before we cut out of our expensive fashion fabric. So I'm using muslin today just because I have that on hand and it's not in a bunch of scrap form, which is a little easier to show you guys. There are some things when you're doing a mock-up, you're not going to make a finished garment, so it's often going to take a lot less time, and you sometimes can cut out fewer pieces. So in our case, we want to make sure that we are cutting what we need. So for this, we're going to cut 2 fronts and 2 backs of the bottom section, and we're going to cut 2 of the back, 2 of the front. We don't need to worry about this pocket piece because that's not required right now. We can put that aside. And for our waistband, we only need to cut 1 of these because we're not going to put a facing, a lining on it right now just for the mock-up. It's not required. We just need the front section. So since I only need 1 of those, I'm going to put that aside for right now and cut what I need 2 of. And since this has seam allowance on it already, we can try to conserve fabric and really butt things up together. So this is where our grain line comes in. So remember we drew all of these straight lines on our pattern pieces. That shows us where the grain is. Now the grain fabric is woven, so usually it's woven. There's a selvage, and then there's a cross grain. The selvage is these edges that have a finished edge on them, and that is running lengthwise along the fabric. So fold your fabric so that the selvage edges match together like so. And then we know that a perpendicular line to that is the cross grain. So the selvage is our true grain line, and so that's where we want this straight line to be parallel to. So this is where one of these quilting rulers comes in handy, and we can go ahead and lay out our pattern pieces. I'm going to lay it like this to conserve fabric. Lay out our pattern pieces so that it's straight along this edge, and this is straight along the grain line. And I'm going to go ahead and just pin the pattern piece directly to the fabric. If you're using old bed sheets, obviously you're not going to have a selvaged edge, but at least cut this. It shouldn't matter on a bed sheet since it's cotton, whether it's on the straight grain or on the cross grain. Usually neither one is going to have very much stretch. So you should be able to see a weave pattern, or if you pull it, it shouldn't stretch. So as long as you fold it along that, a non-stretched edge, and then lay your pattern pieces along that so that they're parallel to that folded edge, you should be fine. Okay. This muslin has a really strong grain line to it, so I can kind of just see it for these sections. Our piece is all laid out, and now there's a lot of different ways to transfer patterns onto fabric. Honestly, my favorite way is just using a pencil if it'll show up. There's lots of different marking tools you can use. I'm just going to use a pencil to draw here. So I'm going to trace on this right side, making sure to be really careful about that, about getting right on the edge of there. And then I'm going to use the pencil to also mark all of my notches. So here's a notch here, double notch. So I'm just going to mark that right on the inside of the fabric, right underneath the pattern notches. This is where using a poster board or like a tag board to make your patterns out of can be really helpful, because it's a nice thick edge that you can trace easily. Again, I'm marking my various notches and circles here. Okay, so here's my pieces. Since I need two, I'm going to pin this fabric back together so it doesn't shift around on me while I'm cutting. We do not want that to happen. And then we need one of these waistband pieces. So that will fit right there. Just going to flip this out of the way for a second. All right, so now I'm ready to cut. You can use regular fabric scissors for this. I'm going to use a rotary cutter, which means I need to get my rotary board out. Go much faster that way. Now that I have both pieces cut out, I need to transfer those same notches from one side to the other side. So they're mirror images of each other right now, so you want to make sure that you are doing this side and then flipping around and doing this side as opposed to here. And if it's easier for you to use the pattern and just flip the pattern over and use it, that totally works. Whatever you would like, as long as you get all of those notations switched over to the other side. So now this is the front piece. I'm going to show you just what this looks like. So we've got two sections of the front piece, but you have a right and a left side, right? So if we turn this, now we have a right and a left side with all of our marks on the back side of that. Make sure these stay together. So that should be the same for all of these pieces. You now have a right and a left side, front and back, except for the waistband because we only need one of those for the mock-up.